You will need wool, a pair of circular knitting needles, a stitch marker, or a loop of wool. Learning to knit on circular needles opens up a whole world of projects you can try, from tiny baby mittens to seamless sweaters or ready-shaped hats. And there's some great advantages to knitting in the round. First of all, when you get to the end of the pattern, you don't need to sew up seams. You'll have already created a seamless tube shape, like on these leg warmers. You'll still need to weave in the loose ends, but if you watch to the end of this video, I'll show you a sneaky way of avoiding some weaving. The second advantage is that because you're not switching knitting needles from side to side to create stocking stitch, like this, you don't need to alternate between knitting and purling. Purely using the knit stitch on circular needles will create stocking stitch. So first of all, cast on the correct number of stitches from your pattern, as you would normally. Ignore this flexible cable between the two knitting needles and just treat them like regular unlinked knitting needles. I'm just using the knitted cast on technique. Another really good bonus of knitting on circular needles is that it looks really impressive. But once you can knit, it's not that much more complicated to use these. It just takes a bit of getting used to. And once you are used to circular needles, a lot of people prefer them to straight ones and use them for normal knitting as well as knitting in the round. Once you've cast on the right number of stitches, take your right needle in your right hand, and at this point your left needle is the one with the ball of wool attached to it. Now this is the important bit, because you want to join your knitting without any twists. So just follow your stitches back along the needles to the other end, making sure it lies flat. You don't want to join your knitting with a twist in it, or you'll end up with a knitted Mobius strip, and then there's no choice but to go back and start from the beginning. Now just pop a stitch marker on the end of your right needle to mark where the start of your work is. If you don't have a stitch marker, you can just use a loop of wool. Then insert your right needle into the first stitch on your left needle. I usually hold on to both the tail from casting on and my knitting wool and knit that first stitch. Incorporating the tail just gives a bit more strength. Then just continue knitting, but ignore that tail. So once you get back to your stitch marker, you've completed your first round of knitting. Just move your stitch marker across. And this is the bit where you can be sneaky and weave in your cast in tail. So with your next stitch, grab hold of the tail and knit it together with your wool. And do this for the next 3 or 4 stitches. You can trim that tail back later. Another good thing about circular needles is that it's very easy to carry a project around with you, as the stitches can't fall off. But just remember where to start again if you've taken a break. This gets easier to recognise when you have more experience, but to start with, remember when picking up your knitting, it's the needle which is still attached to the ball of wool that goes in your right hand.